I'm David Korn, the Washington Bureau Chief of Mother Jones Magazine, and I'm a blogger for CQ.com, and we're here tonight talking about Matt's new book, which is a mouthful, The Great Derangement, a terrifying true story of war, politics, and religion at the twilight of the American Empire.
I had nothing to do with that subhead, by the way.
Oh, Chris Jackson, the editor. I've worked with Chris in the past. So, you know, unlike some of your interviewers, I've read the book, and if I have it right, let me ask you this: your thesis is that the American government, well, you call it a theory, I'll call it a thesis, is that the American government has increasingly become an enterprise built on deception, self-interest, screwing not the few but the many and serving the few, and that after 9/11, it's become even more so at a time when perhaps Americans would even like it to be less so. Right. And that as a result of this continuation of a process, Americans are tuning out, but not just tuning out, but they're turning to either Christian end times fundamentalist religion, nonsense, or 9/11 conspiracy theory, nonsense, which you equate as equivalents, and that this is the great derangement of which you speak, that America is just going in these two similar but different directions. And my question is, do you really believe that? I mean, is it really?
It's necessary in order to make all the disparate parts of the book fit together.
Well, that's kind of, as an editor and as a writer, I'm kind of looking for the seams. But I mean, it's a pretty bold statement. The book is basically reporting, and you're reporting on the time you spent with John Hagee's Fundamentalist Church in San Antonio, and we'll get into specifics about that, and your encounters with 9/11 Truth, the 9/11 Truth movement, which, if you haven't heard of it, are people who believe either the Bush administration caused 9/11 so they can take advantage of it, or
it's called MyHop, by the way, made it happen on purpose,
or LIHOP, they let it happen on purpose so they could exploit it. So so you start with a bold idea, Americans are tuning out, but this is the result. And so the question is, are Americans that crazy?
Well, in some cases, yeah, and I mean, I think it's really sad. I mean, I sort of have a unique position to sort of see some of this stuff because for Rolling Stone, I had to cover Congress and I had to actually cover the inner workings of the way, of the government up close. And then at the same time, I was also a cultural reporter who had to go out and see the way people were thinking, on the ground. I hate that phrase, on the ground, but out there.
Beyond the Beltway,
right,
fly over America.
Yeah. Right. So I had to see move back and forth between these two worlds, and I just started to notice this enormous gulf between the way things actually are, which is this sort of disgusting, cynical, corrupt, totally morally bankrupt universe in Washington, and
company
excluded. Yeah, exactly. And out there, in actual America, where people are upset about all kinds of things, but everything except that, I think, and I think one of the key features of all this is that, we have a government that's completely incompetent to respond to the needs of its people in a lot of ways. It's basically, as you said, a sort of a mechanism of self-interest and greed and corruption and all of this, but people are so desperate to have some kind of fantasy where somebody's in charge, that on the right, obviously it's God is in charge, and there's
sort of a classic
in charge kind of a guy, and in the 9/11 Truth movement, it's sort of the exact opposite of that.
Well, Satan's in charge,
right,
and he happens to be
George Bush.
Oh, no,
right.
Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney, right, yeah, exactly. So instead of having this completely incompetent, chaotic political landscape that we actually have, the fantasy on that side is we have this super competent, evil, cloistered government that is capable of pulling off these massive conspiracies. And as weird as it is to say, I think people are actually, they find something kind of comforting in that. That's actually an improvement over what the reality is, in a lot of ways.
Better an evil conspiracy of competent people than,
right. Than vacuum,
of incompetence.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But I buy your line about about what I would call the great detachment.
Right.
And I wonder, arguing on behalf of the American people with a capital P, if if calling it the Great Derangement is a little bit unfair. People are certainly detached, but not everybody is seeking comfort, either in the rapture or or 9/11 conspiracy theory.
No, definitely not. But there's an awful lot of irrationality that goes on. I mean, look, we have this presidential election right now. We have a time when we're in the middle of two wars. We have a massive financial crisis that's about to happen, right? And what are we talking about with the election? We're talking about whether Barack Obama was hanging around with Jeremiah Wright how many hours over the course of 10 years, or who's bitter, or who was on the tarmac in Bosnia, or who was hoping for change instead of working for change, and which one is better than the other. And I mean, it's nonsense, but people get so hyped up in these sort of tribal conflicts between Hillary and Obama and blue and red, but they're not angry about the actual offensive problem. You know what I mean? Which is what's actually happening.
But the people who are angry or who feel passionate about something that you describe in your book, the 9/11 people certainly are angry about what they believe is their version of reality, and there's a fair bit of, I think, of anger amongst the hyper-religious people that you hang out with, well, you should tell some stories about that later on. But are these, are they the outliers, in terms of, the anger gamut here in America? I mean,
these are the extremes, is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, just these are small outliers, and maybe the anger sort of dissipates as you move towards the center. I don't know.
That's possible, but I mean, just look at this Hillary Obama thing. I mean, if you're going on a message board where the Obamaites are clashing with the Hillary, I mean, people are ready to tear each other's throats out, and we're talking about two essentially politically identical candidates policy-wise, and so you got to wonder where that anger comes from. They're angry about something, but I think it's kind of incoherent, misdirected anger very often, more often than not, anyway.
Well, let's describe a little bit about the book here. A good portion, if not half, is about your time in San Antonio.
Right.
What took you there, and just describe what group you fell in with.
Yeah, it's a sort of serendipitous that it turned out to be John Hagee. Well, that John Hagee turned out to be sort of an issue this year. This was last. I guess last November. I already had been doing a lot of stuff with the 9/11 Truth Movement. I had gotten involved in all kinds of conflicts with them, and I had plenty to write about there. So I wanted to do something sort of on the other side of the spectrum, and I was really interested in these apocalyptic movements and these books like Left Behind. I don't know, has everybody ever read these books where they believe that, God is going to come down and take all the believers, true believers, up to heaven, whisk them away, and they're going to kind of poof, and their clothes are going to go into the ground like that, and if they're flying planes, the planes are going to crash, and I was really fascinated by the fact that there were so many people who apparently really believed this, that there were, apparently these Left Behind books have sold 60 million copies or something like that. So I decided to pick one of those churches and join it and see what that was all about. And I picked Pastor Hagee in San Antonio, and he's sort of the leading Christian Zionist. A Christian Zionist is sort of it's a niche of this world where they believe that America has to support Israel in advance of the final battle at Armageddon, so that because there's going to be this conflict between Israel and the forces of Gog and Magog, which they think is going to be Russia and Iran. So they want to, the phrase they use is hurry up God. They want to hurry up God by
getting this war started.
Getting it all going and making sure that we have Israel's ready for the whole conflict and everything. So
go Jews.
Exactly, yeah, except they have to convert.
Before or after the battle?
Before, yeah. Otherwise,
that's a tough sell.
Yeah, it is a tough sell. There's one leader of this movement who said that if they don't convert, it's going to be the mother of all holocausts, which is, the odd thing is that the Israeli lobby and the Israeli government they're very positive about this whole development in the American fundamentalist realm. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu even spoke at our church. I wasn't there when that happened.
Our church.
Yeah, I know. I say that all the time. It freaks me out. But
because you probably one or two out there haven't read the book yet, and you joined this church under a different name.
Right.
you came up with a cover story. You didn't join the church, you infiltrated the church.
Right, right.
Hey,
well, I have kind of an unusual last name, so I thought the Googling problem might come into play.
Yes.
Yeah, so
you became Matthew Collins.
Right, right. And I
Right.
joined this church, and, you know, obviously under false
You
pretenses.
ate with their members, you lived with them, and you were like studying the elephants. How long were you with them? Let me just say, John Hagee, in case you don't know, has become an issue in the campaign. We mentioned this, let's just tell people, because he supported John McCain,
Right.
and it turns out he's made such nice statements such as the Catholic Church is the great whore.
Right.
He said Hurricane Katrina was God's retribution because of the sins of homosexuals in New Orleans,
Right.
and there was a lot of pressure put upon Senator McCain, that straight talker, to distance himself from John Hagee, and he kind of ducked the issue, said I don't agree with him on these things, but I'm glad he's supporting me.
Right, right, exactly. He's got a few rough edges, but overall
So
he's all right.
so while he has tens of millions of followers, prior to the campaign, he became known to the rest of us through this campaign. But you had zeroed in on him before any of this had.
Yeah, before any of this happened. In fact, I didn't even know about the connection to McCain until sort of the very end of my stay there. So it was, and the really funny thing was, I obviously met Pastor Hagee while I was there. He was actually there when I was baptized and shook my hand, and I met him a number of times. And we weren't like on a first name basis or anything, but he certainly recognized me. And then months later, when I was covering McCain on the campaign trail, I ran into Hagee, and I decided to just interview him. So I got my press tags on and a completely different name, and the look on his face was just priceless. Like, where is this guy coming from? It was really funny.
So, since the book's come out, have you heard from Pastor Hagee?
No, I have not heard from him. I don't think I'm going to be on his Christmas list.
But how much time did you spend there? And describe how you, basically infiltrated a particular group of people within the church.
I was there for about 4.5, maybe 5 months. It's a mega church, so there's no restrictions on joining. I mean, it's like going into Home Depot. Anybody can do it. So I went in and.
Hopefully, they help you a little bit better.
Yeah, the service is a little bit better. Yeah, you got those big forklifts and everything. Yeah. But. So I joined, and then you sign up for Bible study classes. But one of the first things I did is I had to go to this thing they called an encounter weekend, which was basically like this indoctrination session where they take you away to the Texas Hill Country and they kind of teach you how to worship in the church. And it was a deeply strange experience where basically it's a little bit like Schlock Freudianism. They kind of tell you that everybody has a wound that deep inside them that was created by some kind of childhood trauma, and that wound leaves everybody with demons inside of them, and that literally demons.
And there can be more than one.
More than one.
There can be lots of demons.
Lots of demons. Yeah. And that one of the functions of this encounter weekend was to teach us how to expel those demons, and they actually lined us up in rows and handed out these little paper baggies, and we were instructed to vomit into the bags on command when the pastor would cast out the demons. And to give you an example of how literally some people took this whole process, there were people that I knew in my particular little group who thought they were going to lose weight when this happened. The line I remember in particular was that, well, they have to weigh something. Right, so
the demons have to, like the soul weighs 21 milligrams.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So there was a health angle to this.
Exactly. So then they passed out these little bags, and we were all, and it went on for like an hour and a half, this sort of demon expulsion where we were all sort of puking into bags. And they had all these rules where you can't pray while you're trying to expel a demon, because if the word of God is in your mouth, it physically blocks the demon from coming out.
Makes sense.
They have all kinds of...
Demons are scared of the word of God.
Right, exactly. It's sort of like a vampire type of thing. And they have all kinds of rules like that. Like you can't... if you're thinking a bad thought about somebody, you can't say it out loud, because the devil can't read your thoughts, but he can hear you when you speak out loud. So if you wish something ill of somebody and you say it out loud, it's going to come true, because the devil will make it happen. So we had, with my fellow members of the church, we had lots of conversations where they would say, and so-and-so would... you had to kind of fill in the blanks, by yourself because you didn't want to bring that curse upon him. And
now,
every minute was an adventure.
Let me ask you this: did you ever feel like a schmuck? I mean, because you're basically winning over the confidence of the people of the church. You're pretending to be something that you're not.
Right.
You didn't let anyone in on the secret, the gag, the plan. And there's a woman named Lori in the book who sort of seems to turn to you in moments of need, and obviously some of these people are coming to the church because to find help with troubles that they've had in their life, and you're there, laughing inside at them, trying to understand them. I understand it's a complicated process.
Sure.
But you are in some ways betraying them.
Oh yeah, it's definitely. In no way is this a morally unambiguous, endeavor to go in and be undercover among normal people. I mean, it's not like being a spy for your country where you have a concrete good that you're going to achieve. This is for a book, and that I'm writing for my personal career, and these are these people.
$26.95.
Yeah, exactly. Spiegel and Grau, ladies and gentlemen. But I mean, it is hard, and I think there were a lot of moments in the book, and I actually tried to sort of bring that out, that it got increasingly difficult for me because you do make friends with these people, and you do see that some of them are really in trouble and have real problems, and there's a lot of stuff I left out in the book, obviously, because I didn't want to make it too hurtful, but. So yeah, it's a difficult question, but all of these undercover assignments, there's always going to be that element of it. I worked undercover in the Bush campaign in '04. I managed one of Bush's offices in Florida for 2 months, actually, and I've had to go through this issue. We actually did really well in that district, but
well, given that there was a 537, vote difference.
That was 2004. We did, yeah.
I'll do that.
But yeah, no, it's to answer your question. Yeah, it is hard, and I still don't have an answer whether it's absolutely morally defensible or not.
Yeah. Now the other sort of schmucky thing that we're all engaged in here now. Is we are kind of making fun of them.
Yeah.
These are people who have very sincere beliefs. They're trying to understand the world. They've come up with answers that are very different than I gather the answers that you and I would have, or a lot of people in this room have. And and in the last year or two, there's been a lot of talk in places like this. There have been books written about atheism, celebrating it, and how God is silly. The notion of God is silly. And where's the line between being respectful of these people, many of whom are economically lower on the rung than a lot of us, and saying this is just craziness, and responding either with parody, satire, or ridicule.
Right. Well, for me, the line is when George Bush gets elected. I mean, I think. They're not living in a vacuum. Where we all live in this country, and what's going on in a lot of these churches is that these people who are, admittedly they join because they're lost, they have personal problems, they need some kind of direction or community, but they get that, but in return they're willing to surrender their responsibility to think for themselves and exercise real judgments about what's going on in the world. And I think it's on some level it's an abdication of your responsibility as a citizen to just sort of hand over your entire thought making process to some dogmatist who has an ulterior motive, and that's what goes on in these churches. And yeah, are we laughing at them? Sure, but we're also trying to point out that this is a problem, and. So yeah, but you're right. That is another schmucky aspect of the whole thing. And if you hang around these people, and I even wrote about this in the end. They're aware that even though perhaps they're being manipulated or perhaps there's something that's not quite right about the church, at least the church isn't laughing at them, and they know that we are. And that's, I think that's why they prefer. To be in that kind of community. So we don't have any answers for them either, and that's probably where we're failing them, I guess.
Well, on that point, there were a couple of portions here, and I think I should put these on. I remember in the 2004 campaign, when John Edwards was running, and he looked like he was about 22 years old. At times, he would be on the stage doing his usual campaign speech, and then he would read something, and he would say, "Wait a second." And we'd take out these glasses, and since he had done this speech about 1,000,000 times already, he must have been able to memorize.
Right.
This. I think he was just doing to look older.
Right. Yeah, he wanted that professorial thing. Yeah.
From page 10, the theory of this book is that history eventually stops repeating itself, and what better time for that to happen than after a massive, nationally televised attack that most of an entire country apparently missed the point of. When a people can no longer agree even on the basic objective facts of their political existence, the equation changes. Real decisions, even in the approximate direction of righteousness, eventually become impossible. Most of the country missed the point of 9/11. What was the point? How did they miss it?
Well, I mean, look at it from bin Laden's point of view, right? I mean, here he does, he's got these concrete reasons for bombing the United States. He pulls it off. Half the country thinks it's God striking back America for tolerating gay marriage, and the other half thinks that George Bush did it. I mean, you must be like, what's the guy got to do to get some credit around here,
wait a second. It's not quite half and half.
I know it's not quite half and half, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, there is this situation where on both sides there's a disagreement about what we all watch this on live television, and we can't even as a people come to a consensus about what we saw. So I think that's I mean certainly there's nobody in the church that I knew who thought that 9/11 was something that happened because the United States had a military presence in Saudi Arabia, or because of something that happened in Afghanistan, or because of our support of Israel, or anything like that. I mean, they almost to the last thought it had some kind of biblical explanation, and that it was retribution for something or other. So I mean, it's not like it may not be half and half, but it's certainly a widespread belief, on that side.
In the book, you raise the point, you seem to suggest that these times are different than other times, which I wonder if that's overstating the present. You write, and one of the things you say is, our national politics was doomed because voters were no longer debating one another using a commonly accepted set of facts. There was no commonly accepted set of facts except in the imagination of a hopelessly daft political and media elite that had long ago lost touch with the general public. So you seem to be suggesting that one of the problems with the American political system is that we no longer have common terms or even common assumptions upon which to base real debates.
Right.
And I wonder if that's really something new, or if it's just seems new because you're so young. I mean, this is because if you go back to I was just thinking off the top of my head while reading this, it made me think, okay, in the 60s, I'm old enough to remember the 60s occurred, not what happened in them. But in the 60s, America was about as polarized at that time as they thought it ever could be. And between culturally, politically, whether it was the women's rights movement, arguing over the war. The war was either the worst thing that ever happened, or a fight to save the country. The civil rights movement, either black people, were real humans that deserved, full integration, or they were something to be kept at bay. You look at, this, Civil War and the abolition movement. There have been times in this country where the country has really been divided on basic, fundamental issues, facts, whatever you call them. And I don't know if, we're certainly divided a lot this way these days, but do you think it's any different now? Has cable TV made it worse?
No, you're probably exactly right that this is something that's cyclical, and it certainly happened before, and maybe it's just because it's my lifetime, but I think there are a couple of factors. There's the internet. It allows people to sort of reality shop to a degree that that they have never done before. I mean, if you're in this church,
true online shopping, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. A one-click shopping. I mean, if you ask them what an environmentalist is in the church, they'll tell you that an environmentalist is someone who wants to impose environmental laws because they want to reduce the population by means of forced abortions. I mean, they actually have beliefs like this because there are internet sites that they read that tell them that this is the case, whereas on the other side of, we're reading that, the global temperature really is rising and we have to do something about it. Well, if you get those two people in a room, they're never going to agree on anything because they have two completely different sets of data that they're working with. And I don't trust your data and you don't trust my data. And, maybe it's just different now because in the old days we were both reading the New York Times or whatever it was, and now there's just so many different sources of information that people can appeal to that it makes it easier for people to retreat into these separate worlds. And that's just maybe that's what I was talking about.
So the powers of self-reinforcement, are greater now, and I mean, in the old days, which one or two people in this room may remember, you had 3 networks giving you news for half an hour at 6:30, 7 o'clock. You had 1 or 2 papers to read, and people would rail against. If you were a conservative, you might rail against the liberal media. If you were a liberal, you might rail against the New York Times for for not being strong enough on the Vietnam, whatever. But you kind of you both came from that point. That was your launching off point. Right. What the New York Times wrote, what Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather, Peter Jennings said, and then you would argue it.
Right.
Nowadays, it's like you don't have to watch the network news. You can get your church newsletter, go to any website you want, or just read emails from friends.
Sure, and there's the additional problem of the traditional news sources, the ones we all used to turn to, as a common, group of people, they've all been impugned by scandals, or there's this Jason Blair and Stephen Glass, and we don't even just distrust the media, but we also distrust the voting results. We distrust all kinds of things because there have been holes poked in the system, and I think people they have more of an ability they have more justification to be skeptical about whatever they want to be skeptical about these days. So they just consciously choose to trust this or that source, and they tune out to the sources they don't like. And I think there's this sort of people are sort of cut loose in a media landscape where we don't know which sources to trust anymore.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. We're going to what?
Afterwards and several other C-SPAN programs are available for download as podcasts. Visit booktv.org. And we'll have more with Matt Taibbi and David Korn in a moment.
Here's a look at some upcoming book fairs and festivals over the next few months. Book Expo America, the premier publishing industry event, comes to the Los Angeles Convention Center with keynote addresses from author Thomas Friedman and comedian Louis Black. And coming live this summer to Book TV, the Chicago Printers Row Book Fair. Book TV will also be at the Harlem Book Fair as it celebrates its 10-year anniversary. At the Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, it's the Roosevelt Reading Festival. The event welcomes authors who research their books on FDR in the library's archives. Then the California Literary Arts Society hosts the Ventura Book Festival. In Georgia, the Dahlonega Literary Festival welcomes best-selling authors Steve Berry and Karen Abbott. Coming up Labor Day weekend, it's the Decatur Book Festival. And in September, in St. Augustine, Florida, the Heritage Festival celebrates local authors. The proceeds from the event will go to the Friends of the Libraries of St. Johns County and the Newspaper in Education program. Please let us know about book fairs and festivals in your area, and we'll add them to our list. Email us at booktv@cspan.org.
And now Afterwards with Matt Taibbi and David Korn continues.
Well, welcome back. I'm David Korn of Mother Jones Magazine and a blogger for CQ. And I'm talking at Politics and Prose with Matt Taibbi, the author of a new book called The Great Derangement, a terrifying, true story of war, politics, and religion at the twilight of the American Empire. Not sunset?
Yeah.
It's a mouthful.
For some reason, people keep latching onto that Twilight word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very evocative. Twilight is always a good word. A lot of poems have Twilight in them. We've talked a bit about your adventures in John Hagee's church in San Antonio. Was there any, which I should remind people you infiltrated to write about, was there any moment there that was the most poignant to you? Any of the stories, anecdotes that you tell here that stand out?
Yeah,
if you remember.
Yeah, there were a bunch that were really interesting to me. I mean, one was the time when we were in Bible study class, and we were talking about, I think it was some section of Deuteronomy where we were discussing the rules of what happens to a criminal when he gets a murderer who seeks out a city of refuge. And one of the points of the Bible study class is that God does believe in capital punishment, and there's a section in there about how God had to kill everything that breathes if the city evoked the displeasure of God or something like that. So we were talking about how God is not against the death penalty, blah blah. And this one guy, who was sort of a new member of the group, raised his hand and he said, "Well, what about all these problems with DNA evidence overturning convictions and innocent people being sent to death and everything like that?"
So he was raising a question.
He was raising a
about
question.
The death penalty.
Right, exactly. And I had never seen anything like this before. I immediately leaped forward in my seat, and everybody immediately glared at him, and he sensed the hostility right away, and he says, "Well, of course those liberal judges are making errors all the time that are sending people to prison."
The liberal judges
right, yeah,
who are
exactly.
against the death penalty are
right,
making
exactly, yeah.
errors that send people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and he immediately retracted everything that he said. He realized he'd made a mistake, and he went back down the rabbit hole and everything. And so I sought the guy out afterwards, after the Bible study class, and I sort of presented.
He probably needed a friend at that point.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to be his friend. I had my own cover to worry about, so I presented myself as somebody.
Oh,
who was,
so you're a vicious guy.
Yeah. I was
this is how you could get street cred with the
right,
the others.
exactly. I was hoping everybody was watching. I'm like, what was that? That stuff about DNA evidence and everything like that. You are for the death penalty, aren't you? And the guy's like, well, yeah. I'm just saying, it's weird, right? It raises questions, and so I started asking him, like, well, what do you mean about liberal judges sending me? The liberal judges are against the death penalty, so what are you talking about? And he's like, well, I'm just, are you a Democrat or a Republican? He's trying to change the subject and everything. And I said, oh, I'm a Republican, of course, everybody is, and he was like, well, me too, and I'm totally for the death penalty and everything. And it's a small scene, but I think that it's interesting because these people, a lot of them, they're going into the church because they want something that's going to be personally meaningful to them. Community, friends, some kind of support system, some way to sort of get through the day-to-day details of life. The political dogma is totally secondary to a lot of these people, but they're just sort of willing to swallow it as a sort of a trade-off that they get, as part of the bargain. But once you take that trade-off, you can't go back. I mean, it's like this kind of groupthink, and it's really, really ruthlessly enforced once you're in there. And so you can't have any kind of discussion about anything, really, because everybody knows how you're supposed to think about everything.
Well, it's not. It's what they're selling or presenting or offering is not a relativist reality.
Right.
It's an objective.
Right.
Black and white.
Things
reality.
are this way.
Right.
Yeah. God was against the ACLU. If Hillary Clinton gets elected, she is going to tax the churches. It says so in the Bible. That kind of stuff. It's not supposed to be something you're supposed to discuss. It's just something you're supposed to swallow. And I don't know. I thought that was. There's a lot of interesting experiences that I had during while I was there, but I thought that was one really interesting one.
Just in the past couple of weeks, one thing that I've written about and has interested me is the attitude of some of these churches towards the religion of Islam. Mm-hmm. And I came upon that. We talked about John Hagee having been an endorser of John McCain. Another fellow who John McCain has campaigned with is a guy named Rod Parsley, who's the head of a big megachurch in Ohio. And he was actually very instrumental in helping Bush win Ohio, a key state, in 2004 by driving or leading tens and thousands of these so-called values voters or social conservatives to the polls. So before the Ohio primary, when John McCain was trying to put down Mike Huckabee finally, he campaigned with Parsley, and whose endorsement he sought, and he received. He called Parsley a moral compass, a great leader, a spiritual guide. I then, said, oh, who is this guy?
Right.
I decided I didn't have 5 months to spend going to his church, the way Matt did, so I did something better. I got his book off Amazon. And overnight delivery, for an extra $20. And I saw that he had written a book. Part of it was devoted to the notion that Islam is a satanic religion. It's based on a deception coming from Satan, and that it's the historic mission of America to see this false religion destroyed. That's a direct quote. And he celebrates the war between Christianity and the United States, the civilized world, and the world of Islam, and that 9/11 was just another battle and was a wake-up call, and maybe we'll get going on this crusade that we should do. And I wrote a story about that and called McCain campaign for comment, and 20 phone calls later, I never heard back from them. And a few other people.
When they do that,
I know.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah.
What's your deadline?
Yeah. But Keith Olbermann and others have picked it up. And but just this week, I found a DVD. I found it on the website for the church and bought it. It took weeks for them to send it to me because they don't believe in FedEx. Apparently, they only surface delivery. I didn't know that you could still get surface delivery. And it's basically a sermon of him saying the same thing, even more inflammatory. And as you know, video speaks more powerfully than just plain old words.
Sure.
So with a group called Brave New World's Mother Jones, we made a film with him saying these things about Islam, juxtaposed to what John McCain says about him. Moral compass, great leader. We must destroy Islam. Right. And the question is, how come John McCain, particularly when we're in the season of renouncing pastors, how come John McCain can get away with not repudiating this guy? And just think about it for a second. I don't want to play gotcha politics, which we know is very easy to do. But to the rest of the world, particularly the Muslim world, if a guy gets elected who is called Parsley a great leader, what is the Muslim and the Islamic world going to read out from that?
Right.
I mean, these words, they come across as empty political rhetoric on the stage. But they do have meaning. They land somewhere, sometimes with a tremendous thud or explosion.
Sure.
So I don't know, did they talk much about either Islam or Judaism or other forms of Christianity in this church?
Oh, Islam, constantly. And we were constantly told that the leadership of the state of Iran, they were constantly comparing it to the Satan of Revelations, and they would strongly hint that all these Islamic states were equivalent to the various satanic forces in the apocalyptic story, and they made no bones about it. I mean, this is something they expect Iran to play the role of the demon in the end game at Armageddon. And from their point of view, they would celebrate somebody like John McCain saying something like that because they believe that we can't have a dialogue with that part of the world. The only thing we can do is have a war and a fight. And so that's, there's no. And the really ironic thing about it is that, of course, these churches have a lot in common with fundamentalist Sunni or, Shiite.
You've noticed.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, our church,
has a sister city.
I did it again. We actually
has
have
a sister mosque in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And,
we hate America. We hate America too. We hate those liberals. Yeah, so do we.
Exchange programs, right?
Those freedoms that people want. Yeah, we don't like that either.
We hate those same freedoms.
But we hate you as well. It can be confusing. Abortion, yeah, we don't like that.
Right.
Pornography, no.
That's true. Yeah, it is all the same stuff, right? Yeah. No, but we also they had the same cell structure that Al Qaeda has, and we know it's true. They specifically told us that we had this structure in the church where there was the pastor, then there was a hierarchical structure where it broke down into groups, and each group was potentially autonomous if it got cut off from the rest of the group. And
if the rapture came and they were left behind?
Or they told us specifically that if they thought that Al Qaeda was likely to target our church as for a military attack, and that God forbid that should happen, that something should happen to the pastors. Our church structure was designed to withstand that because the individual parts of the church were supposed to function autonomously.
But if you say that aloud, doesn't that mean it's going to happen?
That's
that
true.
Was your point,
Yeah.
Hello?
I wonder why it didn't apply there. Yeah, no. But that's what we were told. I thought that was very ironic, though.
I mean, did you ever feel tempted to bring in a cassette recorder or a little video camera? Because I mean, we put up the video, I should say, on MotherJones.com, but of Rod Parsley, and just seeing sometimes the passion and the visceralness, if that's a word, of these beliefs. It's very powerful. It's more so than even reading a great book like yours.
Right. Well,
So I mean, did you try everything?
Hagee's sermons you can get online every week, and you can see them for yourself, and you can buy the DVDs and all that stuff. And he's not concealing the good stuff anywhere. I mean, he's pretty nutty in the stuff that he's selling to the rest of the world. So you can see that stuff for yourself. As for me recording anything, I think I'm advice of counsel. I'm going to decline to answer that question.
The other question I had along those lines, was a question of journalistic technique here, because this is a nonfiction book, right? And there are long scenes in which you have direct dialogue, where you obviously were not scribbling in reporter's notebook.
Right.
Because that would have blown your cover. And
all I'm going to say in answer to that response to that question is that I thought going into this project that I was going to have to fact check this project the way I would for a Rolling Stone article, for instance, where everything would have to be documented. But I think I can't really get into the specifics of that too much.
Okay, but did the NSA help you?
No, definitely not.
Okay, well, inquiring reporters want to know. Let's jump from San Antonio to Iraq,
okay.
Because there is one chapter in your book, I think just one, in which you are an embed,
right,
with some American troops in Iraq, and let me flip to page 90 and do my John Edwards impersonation. Okay, and this is what This caught my eye. You're talking about why the embed process is so dangerous and insidious. A journalist who slips into the habit of rooting for a bunch of nice kids like this in a place like Iraq might easily find himself missing the overall point of his assignment. This certainly had happened to me. It wasn't until my tour in Iraq was just about over that I realized I'd been conned. That I was spending far too much time watching these kids interact with one another, and not nearly enough time wondering what the hell we were all doing here. Now you're sort of spanking yourself a little bit there.
Sure.
But tell me more about that. What do you think you should have been doing instead? What do you think you missed?
That's a tough question, because what can you do? I mean, one of the problems is the security situation is so bad. You can't just go strolling down the street in Baghdad and start asking people, "Hey, how do you feel about America?" I mean, it doesn't work. I mean, you can't even stick your arm out the window of a Humvee in Iraq. I mean, you have to. You're behind the walls of, they call them FOBs, the forward operating base. You're on the FOB the entire time, and when you're not on the FOB, you're in an armored convoy going to a police station or some other secure location. So you never really have any real commerce with actual Iraq. You're sort of in this American archipelago the whole time. And so the only judgments you can make about the entire thing are basically reflections of what the missions are. I mean, you might see an American kid wounded or something like that, or you might actually look out the window and see some kind of hostile activity. Or I was in a police station when a car blew up about 100 yards from us, and I saw that, but I don't know who was blowing up the car or why they were blowing up the car. I mean, that kind of stuff. So the only judgments you can really make are based upon your experience in this holy American community where you have Cinnabon and Burger King and movies and the internet and Baskin Robbins and all this stuff, and you might as well be on Fort Bragg for most of the time. And so after I wrote my article, I wrote an article for Rolling Stone about my experiences in Iraq, and afterwards I realized that I think that I'd completely misread the situation, and I was spending way too much time focusing on what the experiences of these kids was like, and not enough wondering what exactly it was they were being asked to do. So that was
did they ever, or was that just not part of the ongoing conversation?
Well, in this book I write about this one scene where at least one of them has that question, because just for some background, most people, when they talk about the surge, they imagine that we're sending 30,000 more troops over there to patrol the streets like they would in a bad neighborhood in America somewhere. That's not actually the case. Mostly what it is that you're putting more guys on the base, and for 1 hour of every day they take a sort of loop-de-loop around the city, or they stop at an Iraqi police station, and really for the most part what it is giving the enemy a target to shoot at. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of concrete mission that goes on there. It's just a sort of a show, a dog and pony show. And our mission with this group was to bring a hand-to-hand combat instructor to this Iraqi police station. So this retired cop from Georgia who was sent over and was working for one of those security services.
Hand-to-hand combat? You
Exactly.
mean
like
bayonets, or just not even bayonets? Just
yeah, like jiu-jitsu or something like that. So here's some guy who's like a retired cop in Georgia. He gets hired by some company. It wasn't Blackwater or something like that. Yeah. And he was making like $9 grand a month, okay, to do this stuff. And we would bring him at great personal risk, through these bad neighborhoods of Baghdad to an Iraqi police station to teach a bunch of listless, totally disinterested Iraqis how to do, flips and stuff like that. And meanwhile, there's like explosions.
Your tax dollars at work.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And there's explosions going on right outside the police station, and these cops are too afraid to go out there because they don't want to get shot. So
but if they could throw somebody, then maybe they'll be...
Right, exactly, yeah. So,
I'm going to find that guy and flip him.
Right, exactly. They won't go out there with guns, but maybe they'll do it. I mean, it was completely silly. And so there was one moment where the guy who was in charge of bringing our convoy to that place, he's looking out the window of the police station at this burning hulk right outside, and he's looking at the Iraqi cops who aren't moving, and he's looking at this guy from Georgia who incidentally had accidentally discharged a weapon in the middle of a whole bunch of soldiers. Just
this is like Get Smart.
Right, exactly.
Sorry about that.
He's like, oops, I'm sorry, like he didn't know how to clean his gun or something like that. So, this is what the mission was in Iraq. I mean, and every time these guys got into a car, they know that they might get blown up for this, and so there's a scene where he's like, what the hell are we doing here, and that was about the sum total of.
I wonder, if that's just so absurd that if you're in that position and you can't pack your bags and leave,
right,
you just can't afford to think about it.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Yeah.
Because you'd have, you'd short circuit.
Yeah, I think a lot of the guys chose not to worry about it. I mean,
well, the cliche explanation is that guys and gals go to war and they end up caring about their fellow guys and gals, and that's the cohesion that gets them. That's their motivation.
Sure.
Not the grand geopolitical strategy, but going out safely and coming back safely and protecting the group.
Oh yeah, and that's very real, and that's very moving to see. I mean, these kids are. A lot of them come from bad families or broken homes, and they joined the army because they didn't have any place else to go, and this is like the best family they've ever had, and so they're in this incredibly hostile environment, and it kind of doesn't matter why they're there. You know what I mean? They're there, and they have to get through it. So it just sort of becomes its own justification. But the few times they were forced to think about it, I think they had to worry.
Let's come back home for politics for a few minutes before we finish. I'll go to questions. Part of the book, throughout the book, you make the point that the political system is broken, people are disengaged, therefore they become deranged. And the book was obviously written last year, not this year. And I wonder if we look at the political campaign of this year, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, regardless of what you might think about them, it seems to me that the level of engagement, citizen voter engagement in the political process is as high as I've ever seen it.
Sure.
I mean, it's the amount of money that's being raised on the internet, not from the big special interest funders that you and I despise equally,
right,
but from just plain old folks who finally have figured out how to go online and aren't afraid to give their credit card numbers.
Right.
It's stunning to after Pennsylvania. She raised $10 million. She didn't do so well this week. But But in March, I forget the numbers now, but he had a couple 100,000 new donors who had never donated to him before. As if, who are these people?
Right.
So I mean, millions and millions of Americans, if you look at donations as a way of interaction, which is really the only thing you have to do, you can do these days if you want to get involved, more or less, have become engaged. Does that shoot your theory to hell?
Yeah. In the beginning of this campaign, I was watching what was happening with the Obama
there goes
campaign.
the book. There goes
exactly.
the book.
I said to my editor, I said, this is going to be a total turkey, this book, because it's no longer relevant. Because especially I thought that Obama was addressing specifically a lot of the things that I'm talking about in this book. I mean, as opposed to the old method of winning elections, where you target a group of people and you say this other group of people is responsible for your problems, and we're going to demonize those people, and we're going to coddle this group of voters, and so you end up with this sort of tribal warfare where people end up being broken down into these sects, blue, red, or whatever it was. Obama did exactly the opposite. He very intentionally tried to talk to everybody and not disparage any particular group and not go negative and say, look, we all live in this country, and regardless of what we believe, we all have to figure this out together. And it was a new strategy, and I think it really appealed to a lot of people because they kind of hadn't seen this thing before.
This is in politics called speaking to people's better angels.
Right. Exactly.
And which some politicians try to do and pull it off, others don't.
Right. But
people obviously responded, and they made him competitive.
Right.
Because of that, and it worked, and it may work in the next few weeks, and may work in the fall.
Right, but I still think what happened in the fall, in the spring between Hillary and Obama was a regression back to kind of the same old patterns. I mean, again, you had these two almost completely identical candidates politically,
right.
and they were hating each other. I mean, it wasn't their support, not the candidates necessarily, but the supporters were just furious and again dividing themselves up into camps.
But if you go back and look at John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and how many people saw that on HBO? Okay, I mean, there was a lot of hate back there between these two figures who are revered now.
Right.
I mean, is hate, bad? Is there more hate, less hate now in terms of politics? I mean, if you hate someone for there's hating for the right reason, hating for the wrong reason. If you hate a few years ago, I wrote a book modestly titled "The Lies of George W. Bush," and I was lumped in with all these Bush haters.
Right. And
and people, in the Wall Street Journal and others dismissed the book as just a product of Bush hatred. Right. And I raised the question: wait a second. If you believe someone misled you to war,
right,
is hate an inappropriate response?
Sure.
But the fact that there's a lot of hatred, not for different reasons, maybe for I win you lose sort of reasons, between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, is that something to bemoan?
I mean, I think so, because I'm a football fan, and I didn't see an appreciable difference between the behavior of Obama and Hillary supporters and, say, Colt and Patriot fans on the internet. I mean, it was exactly the same sort of thing. I mean, if you ask a Patriot fan, if you ask a Colt fan about Spygate, he's going to tell you that Bill Belichick was the worst, coach in the history of the NFL. If you ask a Patriot fan, well, everybody does it. Well, it's the same thing with Hillary and Obama. You ask a Hillary Clinton supporter about NAFTA, about her vote for her support of NAFTA, and she said, well, you have to make these concessions, or her vote for the war. Everybody was doing it back then. You ask an Obama supporter, unconscionable that she voted for the war, and it's totally predictable. You can't have an argument, because nobody is willing to concede anybody else's points. It's just about my side is right, your side is wrong, and I thought it was counterproductive and ugly and unfortunate, considering the way this whole thing had started out.
Well, I thought it was kind of inevitable whenever you have a close race. At the end of your book, you kind of call for, correct me if I have this wrong, mass balkanization. You argue that that America has been pushed into red and blue divisions, 9/11 versus end times, whatever the divisions are, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, people with hair, people without hair, I don't know. And you seem to think that the answer is to nichify America more so. But when we talk about earlier about the media and about reality, it seems that one point you make is that people have sort of nichified themselves. So if you have this vast, if people are breaking up into,
You're
even
demanding
more.
that I make sense now. Which
Well,
is
for $26.95, we want some sense, Matt. I mean, but is that the answer, or are you just going to say you're on the journey?
Yeah, I might have to cop out. Like, no, I mean, look, I think, again, the negative stuff that I'm talking about with people with reality shopping is when people sort of get into these sort of team enthusiasms, these tribal conflicts where they're part of a group and my group hates your group, and in order for my group's version of reality to be correct, your version has to be totally wrong, and in order for me to exist, you can't exist, that kind of stuff. And that's where I think it's really negative. But if everybody has their own point of view and they're not part of groups and everybody is just sort of equally a citizen, and I have an opinion, you have an opinion, I respect it, you respect me. I think that would be a sort of an ideal way to go. But how we get there, I have no idea. I was just sort of talking off the top of my head by the end of that book.
That's a very honest answer.
We try.
I think we have a minute left here. Do you think the election has the possibility? Let's assume that Obama, gets the nomination and he continues with this trying to bring together message. Do you think there's any chance in hell that he can actually make that succeed within the confines of a general election in the fall?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we always have to hope, right? I mean, I think, but the problem is he has to deliver, and how much can one person really change a really entrenched political system? I mean, you look at what the Democrats came into power in Congress in 2006, and they said we're going to change, like, for instance, the earmark problem, right? And they said when they passed this earmark reform, and they said this is never going to happen again. Well, what happened? The first year that they're in power, the amount of money we spend on the earmarks goes up by 30%. The number of earmarks goes from under 3,000 to over 11,000. And now against
they were just making up for lost time.
Right? Yeah, exactly. We were in the wilderness all those years. Now we have to make up. But I mean, the result of that is that now the approval rating of the Democratic Congress is below even that of George Bush or equivalent to it or something like that. And Barack Obama, in order for him to succeed in pulling everybody together, he has to deliver. And whether he can or not, especially given that he took. He's going to end up having raised $300 million for some people who are going to want a return on that money. I mean.
Well, I'll say after the last 7 years, I think we're due for at least a moment of sanity.
Right.
An escape from the Great Derangement. Anyway, thank you so much. We'll be taking questions in a moment.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, now to ask a question, you have to run.
Following the taping of Afterwards, Matt Taibbi and David Korn took questions from the audience at Politics and Prose Bookstore.
Please. I've done this before. Questions.
Okay.
Questions.
Gotcha.
Questions.
And short, too.
Short, so we can get through a lot of people.
Yeah, I see a lot of people.
Okay. So, are we ready to go? Okay, first question.
Great. Mr. Korn, you asked Matt if he thought the American people were ignorant, basically, that he was talking about in his Undercover. And he said, yeah, kind of. What do we do about them? Do we pander to them? Do we educate them? Or do we wait for them to evolve and then suffer all of the problems they bring about? Because he said when they crossed the line, it became an issue. What do we do with ignorant America?
Well, since I don't believe in evolution, we can take that.
Yes, but what do we do?
Matt,
what are the answers?
One thing that struck me, there was a scene in your book in which I think it was when John Hagee's son is giving a sermon in which you basically say the mental process stops.
Right.
Can you just explain that moment?
Well,
for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I said the mental process stops.
I'm going to look it up in my notes here.
Yeah, that was the moment where he basically got up and said environmentalists are hoping to reduce America's population by forcing us to have abortions, and everyone said, oh, really? Okay, well, true, and I was watching this and I thought, well, I mean, if people are going to swallow that, what aren't they going to swallow, so.
It's that once you've gotten to this place, You've left behind the mental process that a person would need to form an independent opinion about such things. Listen,
that
that's
was in an earlier chapter. Yeah. But you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
that was after the indoctrination. I mean, if again, once you reach the point where you're going to vomit into a paper bag, when somebody casts out the demon of handwriting analysis, which they did in this book. Well, I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to teach this person about global warming? That's not going to happen. So
I mean, to answer your question, this is a democracy, and if there are more of them versus you, you're screwed. Okay, and then if if you have more of them, then you can try to win if they don't steal it at the voting booths. And there are hopefully enough people in the middle that if you make compelling arguments, that's what the Obama-Clinton debate is kind of about at this point too. How do you reach, how do you reach a certain block of voters who sometimes vote Democratic, sometimes don't? Lately, they've been a hard get for the Democrats, and all you can do is, try your best to make compelling arguments. And if if they disagree with you on matters of culture, religion, or guns, try to win them over on other things, and at least give them a hard choice. Okay, economic prosperity or guns. Economic prosperity, well, I'd like a job, but I like my guns, and give them at least a difficult decision to make. And then you're up to the, to the whims of the Republic.
So that Obama's remark, they cling to guns and religion, he lost a lot of people,
well,
elitists.
We don't know. I mean, he's probably going to get the nomination, and we'll see what happens in the fall. But thank you. Can we move on to the next?
Thanks.
You notice that wasn't a speech.
Thank you.
Yeah, Matt, despite your experiences and despite your somewhat cynical take on these things, what gives you hope about American culture and American politics?
Well,
if you have hope.
No, I do. Absolutely, I do. I mean, I lived in Russia for 10 years, and people think when people complain about America, it always blows my mind. I mean, I do complain about it, but in this country, when you call the police, you can be pretty sure that they're not going to kill you as opposed to the guy who's robbing your apartment. You turn your faucet on, and water comes out. Usually, I mean, stuff works in this country. We have a lot of things that are incredible about America. We have an economy that's unbelievably productive, even though a lot of it's moved overseas. But so we have a lot of things to work with here in terms of being able to turn it around. That places like Bangladesh or Uzbekistan, they're so far from being able to actually fix most of their real problems. With us, it's mostly a mental issue. I mean, I think if we can fix a few things and steal a little bit less in Congress and motivate our public servants to actually do a little bit more for us, then it's not we're not talking about them making leaps and bounds. Where it's an incremental advance would probably be enough, and so that's what gives me hope. We're just not that far away, I don't think.
Hi, Matt. I wanted to, back to your sort of the original premise of the book, you were talking about how you felt that Americans were disenfranchised by the political system and that this was very clear, and you saw some of these other institutions that they get involved with you felt as somewhat of a reaction to that disenfranchisement. I was wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit more about your experiences in Russia. This is another country where the common man is entirely disenfranchised. He has no influence at all about what goes on. Did you notice when you were living there that the same sorts of cultural phenomenons happening? And
Aren't conspiracy theories very popular?
Well, except that they're true in Russia. I mean, I'm not even joking. I mean, I was in Russia in 1999 and 2000 when they had the apartment bombings that they blamed on the Chechens, and I believe that there's very solid evidence that the Russian government was involved in that stuff. In fact, a friend of mine named Yuri Shikachikin, a reporter who was investigating that and eventually became a Duma deputy, he was assassinated for looking into that stuff. So I mean, in Russia, when you raise questions about the government, you're probably right most of the time. But to answer your question, in Russia, there's no pretense of people believing that the government works for them. I mean, for them, the government is like foliage or something like that. It's something you watch, but you don't interact with. there's a gulf between the rulers and the people that we don't have in this country traditionally. And they don't believe the press works for them either. So the whole idea of democracy just isn't even, hasn't taken hold at all over there. To answer your question.
Whether it's Obama or Hillary come September and October, can McCain continue to sustain any identification with Hagee without the Democratic candidate forcing the issue with them?
I'm surprised. If it hasn't happened now, the question really has to be, will the media force him to make some kind of decision about that? Because, will Barack Obama's people or Hillary Clinton's people, probably Obama's people, force his hand?
Well, there's a third option too. There will be a lot of independent spending groups that will be running
527s,
against both of the candidates, whoever the Democrat is.
Right. There's the one that's got 800 grand that's already ready to go against Obama for right and everything like that.
So I assume you'll see, particularly in Catholic states, and I'm sure people are scouring those televised sermons of John Hagee, and I can see it coming. I could easily see it coming up in a debate, if not from the Democratic candidate, but from the moderator. I think George Stephanopoulos tried to raise the issue with McCain a week or two back on a Sunday, and McCain hasn't put it to rest because he's still not rejecting him. So it's still in play, but to a much lower degree than we saw with
McCain's really between a rock and a hard place, because if he repudiates Hagee too much, he's already dicey with the Christian right. Yeah. So it's a tough situation. I think it's a lose-lose situation for him either way. So.
Yeah, just coming back to what you were talking about earlier about the sort of tribal warfare. I mean, we're here in Politics and Prose, and we're sort of part of a tribe here ourselves.
Okay.
And the conversation,
not a very scary one.
And in the conversation so far, there's been a lot of ridicule of conservative Christians. Do you worry at all in terms of building that consensus, or what you admire about Obama? That in the conversation so far, it sort of provoked maybe more of that tribal conflict.
When we laugh at those people and everything.
Yeah, or and maybe do you worry at all that you're sort of you're pulling out this particular example in a way that's quite palatable for a liberal audience, right? And would it be actually maybe more provocative to cite some of the recent polling numbers looking at evangelical Christians, and which shows that they're not at all monolithically politically conservative?
Sure. Yeah. No, you're right, and guilty as charged. I mean, my personal justification for doing that is that I in my work I've always made it a point to go after both sides. I've never been one of those people who just always goes after Republicans or Christians. I mean, I always make sure to criticize the people on the other side too. So
Democrats and pagans.
Right? Yeah. Exactly.
I heard it today, but maybe it's in the book.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, I think that it gets back to the whole question of is it counterproductive to snicker and laugh at these people? Well, maybe, but they're funny. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say.
But he's right in that that the evangelical population in America. First of all, it wasn't always monolithically Republican. Jimmy Carter got a lot of the votes from them, obviously, in '76, being, born again himself. And the polling in the last year or two shows that they've become less enamored with Republicans than with Bush. And some of them, there's a whole, as there's a whole movement among some evangelicals to deal with global warming. Right. And, in a population where 70 to 80% of the population now believes the war in Iraq was a mistake, when only 28% approve of George Bush and almost 70% disapprove of him. Obviously, some evangelicals are in our tribe, so to speak, on those issues.
Sure, yeah, and in fact, after the excerpt that I just from the book that I just published in Rolling Stone, I got a lot of letters from Christians. And surprisingly, they were a lot friendlier than the 9/11 truthers were for me. But a lot of them said the same thing. Look, I agree that this kind of Christianity that you describe has a lot of problems with it. That it's manipulative and false, and that we have to get past it. We as Christians have to get past it. And I got many more letters like that than I got from people who were angry at the way I talked about it.
Hi, Matt. I follow you on the Smirking Chimp, and which you don't obviously blog in long enough. And I'm Bill Maher and in Rolling Stone. And I've seen you like shrug off the comments, the comparisons to Hunter S. Thompson, and I was wondering if maybe you could elaborate on some of the journalists that or people that you admire that maybe influenced you. And two, if you could possibly tell us who you would like to see as a vice presidential nomination after as much political following as you've done.
Well, first of all, about the Hunter Thompson thing, I mean, I just say that having the job that I have for Rolling Stone, it's kind of like being a quarterback for the Denver Broncos. Like, if you're anything less than an icon, you suck, you know? And I've thought a lot about this because it's something I've had to deal with, you know, ever since I took this job. But, you know, a lot of people have real problems in this world. The biggest problem that I have is constantly being compared to a better writer than me. It's not so bad. So, but, you know, Hunter Thompson, I read him growing up, and he's an unbelievable writer. I think what he did was a lot different than what I do. He was much more ambitious, and his writing was really like multi-dimensional in a way that I don't think anybody right now is writing. It was like great fiction what he was doing. So I maybe rip off a little bit of some of the stylistic stuff from him, but not the core technique. Some of the other people that I read growing up were like Mencken, Saki, a lot of the Russians like Gogol and Saltykov and people like that. So. But I never wanted to be a journalist. I always wanted to be a novelist, but I really suck at fiction. So, anyway, last part of your question, I like John Edwards a lot. You know, I think I followed him in 2004, and
I noticed in the book you were pretty soft on John Edwards.
Yeah.
You were really soft on John Edwards.
Yeah.
I mean, really soft.
I know. Yeah, a lot of people give me a hard time about that. I mean, when I first saw him, I thought he was like running for president on a frat dare in 2004. He just was like, "Hey, yeah, we're running for president. It's cool," and I just didn't take him seriously at all. And but you know, this time around, I watched him in Iowa, and he was like everything I always wanted in a presidential candidate, because he was like, "Look, this is the experience that I had in Congress. This is how they take." People give congressmen money to defeat a bill because, you know, it's going to be counterproductive to your campaign contributors, and this is how they make it impossible for you to buy generic drugs and that sort of thing. And he was educating people. I mean, how many times does a politician tell you something you don't know already? You know, I mean, in this whole campaign between Obama and Hillary, did you learn anything really? You know. And that was why I really admired what he did. And I'd love it if he was the running mate, but I have a feeling it's not going to happen. So.
Thank
You've
you.
talked a lot about ignorance and different kinds of people's ignorance and the problems in terms of, you know, people don't, you know, watch Walter Cronkite anymore and all of that. And a lot of people, myself included, would argue that your colleagues really have a lot to do with that. That even people who I used to think of as somewhat skeptical, people who've actually spoken here, like Evan Thomas, you know, pull their punches with John McCain, and people who are supposed to be very distinguished, like David Broder, you know, write just trivial crap. And so I'm wondering, what is it that the public can do to try to change that?
Don't buy it.
Yeah, don't buy it.
But that isn't working. I mean, the print media, the television, it's losing its audience. You know,
not enough.
It's not. You know, the market is imperfect, and most markets are distorted, but it's not working. What can people do to change that?
But there's the whole media establishment is undergoing changes, which I find it more exciting now. I mean, you spent years in Russia running an alternative weekly, because I feel as if I can compete now with anybody in the MSM. And I think there are a lot of great reporters in the mainstream media. I have a lot of friends, you know, Dana Priest at the Washington Post. I mean, you know, we wouldn't know anything about secret CIA prisons and a lot. And, you know, the Times has broken great national security stories.
But Dana Priest is an exception. I mean, I read the Post every day and just kind of laugh at most of the people.
But the thing is, but now, unlike any other time in the past, we talked about the gatekeeping and the single voices in the old days. you can come, whether it's to the National Review site, the Mother Jones site. You can find Matt's blog at Rolling Stone or Smirking Chimp. I mean, you can seek out alternatives. And even if you don't like what David Broder wrote that day, there are going to be 25,000 bloggers raising the same point that that you can sort of chime in with. And I think to some degree, I don't know what you think, that a lot of the old media biggies, are a little more sensitive these days. First they wanted to hold all this at bay, but I think they've come around. They're not going to change their ways drastically, but I think there are changes on the edges.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, but I also think that I think you're both right, though. I mean, I think for the most part, the television media is still going with this sort of silly reality show angle with the campaign, and it's really up to people to find all those excellent things that you're talking about.
And let's give a plug to C-SPAN.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. If you don't like what David Broder is saying about something, you can watch it yourself now. If not just on C-SPAN, but on the websites. I mean, you could never do this before. If someone gave a speech, you had to take it from the reporters. Now, people can argue over what Barack Obama's speech meant, but they can't argue over what he said because you can see it yourself.
Right.
I mean, that's stunning. I mean, that wasn't like the way politics and the media used to work.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I would add is. For instance, this campaign trail story, I think the real story isn't out there in the campaign trail during campaign season. When we're following these guys out and they're giving the same speech over and over and over again, they're not saying anything anyway. The real story is who are they raising money from and what are they going to give back for that money. And it would be great if the public demanded new laws that allowed us to see exactly where all that money was coming from and what they were getting in return for that, so that we could actually cover that story. Because right now all we can do is sort of anecdotally hear who is a bundler, and just sort of sift through lists of names and try to guess who they might be on the the FEC website and that sort of thing. So we can't really. It's hard for us to cover the real story so far.
This will be the last question here.
Two things I never understood about the Christian right, and I'm wondering if you could enlighten us with your experience being in the church. Their values seem to be backwards from what Jesus said. Jesus talked about the poor and the meek shall inherit the earth and helping the needy, and they're obsessed with the death penalty and gay marriage, etc. How are they on issues of poverty and the poor? I realize they don't think the government should get involved. The other question I have is, it's my understanding that the Christian right basically believes if you don't accept Jesus as your Savior, you're going to hell. Mm-hmm. Now, you touched on this before. I understand they have to support Israel so that Israel can be part, I guess, of Armageddon and the Holy War can play out. How can they support a whole nation who rejected Jesus?
Well, in their point of view, they're supporting the state of Israel, which was once theirs.
Theirs?
Yeah, I mean, back in the Old Testament days, and so what the people who are currently living there and are Jews at Armageddon, they have to convert. That's
wait, they believe that Israel was once Christian?
Well, no, I mean, you're reading about the Israelites in the Old Testament. They believe that was the antecedent to their current Christian faith, and that they have to reclaim that land for themselves eventually. But they do believe that the Jews who live in Israel now, even though we're supporting their secular government for this as part of this movement, they do have to convert before Armageddon happens. To answer the first part of your question, the Jesus of the Gospels is like this touchy-feely hippie who goes around being nice to people, They're really not interested in the Jesus of the Gospels. They like the Jesus of Revelation, who comes back with a rod of iron and just kicks ass. And they love him because he's going to come back and they talk. I mean, I must have heard that rod of iron phrase once a week, where he was going to come back and hit somebody, ACLU judges or liberals or Muslims or whoever else they were angry at.
Rolling Stone writers?
Exactly, yeah. And so they believe that they love the Old Testament, they love Revelation, not too much in the Gospels. levels.
Quick question: have you heard from anybody in the church who you used to hang out with?
Yeah, I
And?
heard from Lori. Lori, but she has her own problems with people in the church, and I think she was strangely accepting about the fact that she saw me on the Bill Maher show.
So she's obviously violating several commandments just by watching Bill.
Exactly.
She's coming back to your tribe.
Right. So I got a call right after the show, and I just, without thinking, answered the phone. I was like, she's like, so that's who you are? And I'm like, yeah, it was bad. But she was cool about it, I have to say. I haven't heard from anybody else. The one other time I did one of these things with the Bush campaign in '04, I heard from people after that, and it was not friendly. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it was very, very nasty.
But you're still with us, and I'm glad you are.